Okay, also, a couple of folks asked me to talk through the genres of writing that we'll be covering. I'm sitting in this strange position because this is not my classroom and there are people's pictures on the wall, and so I obviously don't want other people's pictures in a video. So we're looking at three kinds of fiction, three kinds of literature. Fiction. Fiction is anything that is not factual. Fiction can be very realistic, but it's something that didn't actually happen. It's something that the author has imagined. So fairy tales are fiction. Winnie the Pooh is fiction, right? Stories are often fiction. We are not reading nonfiction in this class, although nonfiction is also a part of literature, but we will not be venturing into that for this class. So because we have a limited amount of time and because short stories do a really good job of showing all of the literary elements I want you to understand about fiction, about the genre of fiction, we will be reading short stories. So that is this week. That's this first week of instruction and also the content you'll be reading, those 8 short stories. Like I said before, if you don't have the ability and time to get through all of them, please at least skim the ones you can't read through. Most of them are short, but there are a couple that are a bit longer. And I really want you to get a sense of each one of the stories so you understand the element I'm asking you to understand and look at. So that is fiction, something that is not real or factual or happen in the world, although it's totally imagined and invented by the writer. It can be based on the real world, it can be very realistic, but it did not happen exactly in the way that it is represented. It is not real life, right? Even if it appears to be like real life. That's fiction. And we will be reading it through the forms of short story. Poetry, gosh, what is poetry? Poetry is actually what I am focused on for my MFA, so that's what I've studied for the last 2 years. Poetry is, let me back up. Fiction is also written in prose. Prose is anything that is not poetry. You are writing in prose when you write me an essay. I am writing in prose when I write you an email. Prose is not poetry. Poetry is where you break the lines, you use all kinds of language devices and literary devices to create an entirely new representation of an idea through a poem. So you'll see that there's so many different styles of poems we're reading. There is such a thing as prose poetry, which as far as I can tell, everyone struggles to define. So poetry is a kind of very open as far as what defines it. There are 3 types of poetry. We'll get into that next week when I post a little lecture on poetry. I'm not quite sure how else to define this in the most general terms. It's not prose. It often is in verse, but it can be formal verse, like a sonnet is a certain kind of poem. It can rhyme. It doesn't have to rhyme. There are lots of qualities that every poem has in common. I think I want to say that, or there's at least a few qualities that every poem has in common to make it not prose. But outside of that, poetry is a wildly large genre with a lot of variation in it. And then finally, plays. Plays are written to be performed. So I find drama to be the hardest genre to teach because we'll be reading it, not watching it, and not performing it because we won't be in class to read to each other and even act out the parts. So I think it's the biggest challenge for me to teach. I'm not so trained in it, but it's essentially the script. We'll be reading the script of plays that are meant to be performed. So when we get to the drama genre, I'm going to be asking you to do a lot of work to visualize what you're reading because that will help you have a better grasp on what it is, why it was written, and the purpose of it. So that is your quick little intro to the 3 genres that we will be going over in this course, which is literature and composition. Once again, literature is these basically written works of art is what I would define literature as, and composition means writing. So we will be practicing our composition skills, our writing skills through what we read. We will be writing about the literature we read in this course. All right.